So let's bring in our senior White House correspondent, Jim Acosta, who is with the president in Mexico and also host of Fareed Zakaria GPS, Fareed Zakaria himself. But Jim Acosta, let me begin with you because we just turned around that sound from the president. And it sounds like he's saying, you know, the people in Kiev should be able to speak freely, and the answer is not violence.
That's right. And keep in mind, this was not supposed to be on the president's agenda coming down to this summit of the North American leaders. He's meeting today with the president of Mexico and the prime minister of Canada. And yet world events have intervened and the president is responding. You saw the president making those comments there with his national security advisor, Susan Rice, not too far away. And one particular thing jumped out at me, Brooke, during those comments, and that is when the president said that there would be consequences in Ukraine if people step over the line. And that, of course, is going to draw comparisons, invite comparisons, has already invited comparisons to that red line President Obama drew with respect to Syria when he warned the regime of Bashar al-Assad, don't use chemical weapons. Then, of course, when it was widely reported that Bashar al-Assad's forces did use chemical weapons, the president came very close to using military action against that country and then pulled back, choosing the diplomatic route. So you have to wonder now what the president is going to do with respect to Ukraine, what he can do, especially when the Ukrainian government, as you just mentioned, Brooke, seems to be cozying up to Vladimir Putin, who has been a nemesis of President Obama on the world stage, not just in Ukraine, but in Syria as well.
Okay, Jim Acosta with the president's comments there in Mexico. Fareed Zakaria, big picture here. I want you to just explain to the viewer here in the U.S. as we look at I feel like the map really tells this geographic story because you have, you know, Ukraine and then Russia and then the West. And it really is this, they're stuck in the middle. I mean, literally, but also, you know, figuratively, politically speaking. It's this back and forth, back and forth. And this isn't new, correct?
This isn't new at all. If you look at that map, you can see that Kiev is very close to Russia. Well, the modern-day Russia, the Russian Empire, in many ways started in Kiev. Ukraine has been part of Russia for 300 years. So this is a very complicated relationship. Many Russians, many Russian friends of mine who are very liberal still think of Ukraine as almost an essential part of Russia or an extension of Russia. So, and there are parts of Ukraine, by the way, that are very pro-Russian. Ukraine is split in half between a Catholic side, which is on the west, Orthodox side, which is on the east. The eastern Ukraine tends to be more pro-Russian. Western Ukraine tends to be more pro-Western. Some of this is old news, by which I mean there is a younger generation of Ukrainians that clearly wants to be part of the modern world, clearly wants to be part of the West. But there are these old ties, and that's why you have this tussle, West versus East. It's almost like watching the Cold War all over again. And that's what makes this one, this extraordinary pictures we're seeing so different from what we saw in Egypt or any of these other protests. This one has true geopolitical and dimension to it, because you do have great powers on either side. Europe and the United States on the one side and Russia on the other.
Let's talk about the relationship, you know, outside of Ukraine, Russia. How about Russia, U.S.? And then there was that sort of infamous F-bomb, right, dropped not too long ago. Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland, she's, you know, talking on the phone to the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Here's part of that conversation.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, you know, the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it.
So the it here is the fighting, as we've been describing, which is now, you know, sort of blown up there in Independence Square. But explain to me what we think, you know, she's saying going around the EU. Is she saying, let's just take this U.S. and handle this U.S. and Ukraine?
The European Union has not been trying to wean the Ukrainians away from the Russians very hard. They put their own set of conditions. So the U.S. has felt a little frustrated that the Europeans don't realize that they really have to offer a bigger carrot. But remember, as you could hear in that conversation, the big issue is an Obama versus Putin, United States versus Russia, because Henry Kissinger said on my show a couple of weeks ago, Vladimir Putin probably views what is going on in Ukraine as U.S.-inspired and a dress rehearsal for what they would like to do in Moscow. In other words, that Washington is encouraging a kind of regime change in Ukraine, and our hope is that eventually regime change in Russia. Now, whether or not that's true, that was Kissinger's view of how Putin is probably looking at the situation. So the stakes are very high for Russia. They don't want to let Ukraine out of their sphere of influence. But the stakes are very high for Putin because if the elected president of Ukraine can be overthrown by a popular revolution, well, that sounds a lot like the elected president of Russia and his opposition.
You have the Putin-Obama relationship, which, to use an adjective, tense. Maybe that's putting it nicely. You just heard the president, our president, speaking in Mexico, and to Jim Acosta's point, saying there could be consequences. How may that play out between U.S.-Russia relations?
Well, it's a very good question, Brooke, and it's a very tough one. And I think Jim pointed out exactly the danger. You don't want to make a threat that you can't carry out. What are we going to do if something were to actually happen? Are we going to send troops into Kiev? Of course not. The Europeans going to send troops? No. What we could do is sanctions. Now, that's meaningful because Ukraine is a real trading country, unlike Syria, where those kind of things are meaningless. But what would sanctions do? They would drive Ukraine further into Russia's arms, because if they can't trade with the West anymore, the Ukrainians would trade more and more with Russia, and their economy would get even more closely tied with Russia. Do we really want that? So we have to think through what is the best strategic way to deal with this. Probably there is no getting around the fact that we would have to have some kind of dialogue with the Russians to try to figure out how we can allow Ukraine to have real independence and have a real relationship with the West in a way that Russia considered acceptable. Because if the Russians view this as totally unacceptable, I don't quite see what levers we have that can force Ukraine out of Russia's hands.